So tonight's shiur is Leilu Nishmat.
מאיר בן רחל, ממשפחת אמזלק, ורחל בת חנה ממשפחת אמזלק.
רחל בת חנה. This is his mother?
Daughter.
Oh, his daughter, named after the suffering. Very good. Okay, so one of the many curious details you have in Megillat Esther, you have to appreciate this when you're learning Torah Shebichtav, that sometimes it's very curious why something is included, and sometimes it's very curious why something is excluded. In other words, the Midrash will sometimes tell you, oh, guess what, there's a story behind the story, or there are details that are missing, there's something we didn't know. The story almost only makes sense sometimes without these details, and then you really have to scratch your head and ask yourself the question, why leave out relatively important detail? And then sometimes the detail is included. You would think it's something insignificant, something that's not that important. The technical aspects of how one thing got from one place to the other, or details and descriptions. You'd say, why all these details, all these adjectives? What's the big deal? So, an innocent, innocuous pasuk. We're told that Ahhashwerosh throws a massive party, and as far as we know, he is a professional alcoholic. I mean, they're drinking throughout the entire Megillah. It is what it is. It's not like this is a mystery to us. Chazal probably knew that it was a culture. You'll see the Midrash describes this very often. That Persian culture was especially inclined to such things, big meals and lots of alcohol. So the Megillah is one long party. You'll see it's like one seudah after another, one mishteh after another. And in this particular case, this is the first party that sets everything off. In other words, this is the party at which Ahhashwerosh feels that he's consolidated his power. No one's going to challenge him. He's already taken the kingdom from the Babylonians, the Bablim. Now it's solidly in the hands of the Persians. 127 nation states are paying him taxes, and he's basically in control of everything. And Chazal tell us that he had made a calculation, and he understood that the 70 years that we were promised to be in exile, meaning that was like a minimum, at least 70 years, they're going to be taken to Babylonia, and they'll stay there until I revisit them, so said Hashem. And our tradition was we had 70 years. And he calculated 70 years, but he calculated wrong. Back then they used to count years in a king's reign. So this would be the first year of the king Ahhashwerosh, second year of the king Ahhashwerosh, third year of the king Ahhashwerosh, etc. We're now in the 8th year of Barack Obama. That's how they used to keep time. And he counted this way, and because kings didn't necessarily conclude their lives at the very end of the monarchical year, there was room for a little bit of error. So he throws a massive party. He believes Beit HaMikdash will no longer be rebuilt, and so the Jews are his subjects forever. They're going to stay in the Galut for the rest of eternity. And so we're told that among other things that are going on at this party, the drinks are being offered as prescribed, right? That is what's prescribed, what's commanded, what you're told to do. And ones, there's no one there to force you to drink. No one forces you into alcoholism. It's an acquired taste. It's something that's best acquired slowly. Drink a little bit more, drink a little bit too much, and then all of a sudden you become one of us. So the Midrash catches this, right? And it expounds upon it a little bit. What does that mean? That drinks are basically offered, on a kind of voluntary basis without anyone being forced or obligated to drink. So where it says the Yod Gimel, if you have the photocopies. So we begin with the quote, "Vashetiyah kadat en ones." So the drinks are as prescribed. There is no one to force anyone. Kedat kol makom makom. In other words, how do you properly offer the drinks in a really free, open, and let's say unintimidating way? Kedat kol makom makom. So it all depends on local customs. There are some places where they drink like this, some places where they drink like that, etc. So Midrash goes on. Itatar deba'e megam uvatar ken shateh. So there are places where, this is Aramaic, where people like first to eat and then to drink. Why drink on an empty stomach? There are places where first you drink and then you eat. Why? Because you're poor and you can't afford much alcohol, so it does more for you on an empty stomach. The other excuse is that it helps to open your appetite, it helps to make you a little more interested in eating, and you have to put out the fire. So, but one way or the other, there were different approaches, different customs. So every nation had its own peculiar customs, and Ahhashwerosh was very careful to recognize this, careful to let people drink according to whatever they were accustomed to. Okay, so here there are a couple of technical terms we're not going to get lost in, but so just like the perhaps the Ethiopians, or it's one of the non-Jewish people that was somewhat indigenous to Israel. Darashatan hamara dezikin, right? Atilahon hamara de. So the Kutim, this group of people that were kind of converted, kind of not. They were not into particular kinds of drinks, so they wouldn't the way the Mefarshim describes Matot Kiuna describes this as a particular utensil they used to use to preserve the alcohol. So they wouldn't bring an alcohol that was preserved in one particular kind of container. They'd bring it in another kind of container, the ones that they were more used to. Instead of keeping it apparently in wooden casks, they would prefer to keep it in porcelain for whatever reason. Okay, so to such an extent that he was really careful that everybody gets to drink however they like to drink, in whatever order of the meal they want to drink, in whatever utensils they prefer to store the wine or from which they'd like to drink it. Enonis, and we go on, we explain, so what does it mean that there's no one there to force anybody to drink? Ben Paka. Here, once again, you have to look at the Mefarshim. There's lots of Greek and Persian and Aramaic words in the Midrash. So, Anpaka, apparently, according to the Yefanaf, we're talking about relatively large cups. The Persians were really into drinking out of large cups. And so, you would think they expect everyone to drink the way that they themselves drink. Think about the German Bierstein, those really big cups they drink beer out of. So why would anybody want to drink beer out of a shot glass? Well, if it were up to me, I would make my own rules and do whatever I want. But Ahhashwerosh is careful to say, no, if people want to drink in big cups, let them drink in big cups. Let them drink in little ones, let them drink in little ones. So Rav has an interesting point he adds on to this, where he says, what does it mean that nobody forces you to drink? When it comes to yenesech, back then people were very religious about how they would make wine. And they would make it in the name of Avodah Zarah, or they would invoke idolatrous incantations when they made their wine. Sometimes when they put it in bottles or they put it in casks, they would shake it a little bit for in honor of the Avodah Zarah. And so even the Jews, they weren't forced to drink non-kosher wine. That's very accommodating when you think about it. He could have given us non-kosher wine, and for all I know, people would have drunk it because it doesn't sound like it was a very religious generation. But that he was careful about. So. Amar Binyamin Bar Levi, Enones bepakata. So this is another form of cup in which they used to drink. Taman shatan begasa, because they're in apparently in the Persian era, in Persia itself, they would drink in these very big cups, and therefore nobody forced anybody to drink out of larger utensils. Rather, they could drink out of the smallest ones that they wanted. Kichen Yisad HaMelech. I'll talk about something else. This is about what he built and how he built his palace. So why do we care how people were drinking at the time? Yeah. It's just a bizarre. So that people were drinking is one thing. That they were alcoholics. He's a politician. We expect politicians to be alcoholics. Why? And misogynistic womanizers, for that matter. So this already has deep roots to it. Who cares? Who cares? Megillat Esther is supposed to be it is a canonized book in the Tanakh. We're supposed to be learning divine, spiritual, godly lessons from this. Why on earth do we waste our time and waste our words discussing how people drank and what they drank and how much of it they drank, in what kind of utensils they drank, in what order they were drinking, if it was accustomed to drink out of big utensils or out of small ones? So what? So what? What does this come to teach us? So, if you look in other places in the Tanakh, you'll find that people drank on lots of different occasions. And one of the classic pasukim that's always quoted in the context of drinking alcohol is that Tinu shechar la'oved v'yayin lemare nafesh. It's a pasuk in Mishlei. Give, old, aged wine to la'oved, to the loser, someone who's just not very successful in life, whatever the term. V'yayin lemare nafesh, and give wine, maybe a younger wine, to people who are of bitter spirit. So it's not new to us today that people drink alcohol, or for that matter take drugs, basically. Similar effect, in order to kind of forget about their troubles or their sorrows. So you'll find people drinking under unhappy circumstances, or let's say for not such happy reasons, which is fine. People drink, it's one of the effects of alcohol. And if it weren't for that, I'm sure they would consume a lot less of it. And then you find drinking in the form of simcha. Typically we take out wine, we expect people to drink at happy, joyous, festive events or occasions. By the way, it just so happened that we had the chut of participating in a Brit Milah this past Shabbat. Nobody was forced, but there were some very nice liquors out at the tables. And people with the best of intentions sometimes pour you a little bit more than you intend to drink in a lifetime. And so it's nice. They're trying to increase the simcha, to make for an atmosphere where everybody's loosened up and relaxed and enjoying themselves. Okay, so maybe it's part of a happy festive event or happy festive occasion. You start to scratch the surface with the Midrashim. You start to understand that it's not, these aren't insignificant details. And when you really get into it, you start to discover a little bit of the depth behind this particular concept. Now, if you were to zoom out a little bit and look at the entire Megillah, okay, one wouldn't be wrong were you to come to the conclusion that the entire Megillah begins with, continues, and ends with wine. Maharani Prague is one of the first ones who points this out, and he says, so the decree itself really began out of all of this. Okay, how is that? Well, if you're familiar with the story, Ahhashwerosh throws a party, this particular party, where he's celebrating the consolidation of his power. And he gets drunk, because he's always drunk. And he decides he wants Vashti to come put herself on prominent display, and I'm sure with the greatest intentions of tzniut. The fashion industry then was nothing like what it is today, where had expectations that women would come out dressed, but the Midrash actually says he expected her to parade around naked to show people this is his wife, and shifun hayanas, and everybody look at her. So she refuses to come. He's offended by this, and so he goes looking for advice. So the Gemara says first he approaches the Chachamim. The Chachamim said, how do we answer a question like this? I'm insulted, I was publicly embarrassed by my wife, I commanded her to do something, she wouldn't do it. Right? A real knuckle-dragging monkey of a man. So he's offended, he's insulted, what does he do? He goes to the Chachamim, you tell me what you think I should do. Chachamim said, if we tell him to punish her, he's going to regret it one day, and he'll come looking for us. And if we tell him not to punish her, he's going to think that we're insulting him and offending him, we don't care about his honor, his respect. So what do? They abstain, like anyone in a complicated situation. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Sheval ta'asa adif. Better we shouldn't get involved. So he ends up going to Haman, right? And Haman, who is first mentioned in the Megillah, is kind of backwards, meaning his memuchan, that's how he's referred to in the beginning of the Megillah. So he says, not only is this an affront, not only is this an insult to the king himself, but all of the men in the entire kingdom should really be concerned. We should be worried. This is the beginning of a potentially feminist movement. And what good are women if we can't control them like we control cattle? If we can't tell them what to do and expect them to obey what it is that we say, this is the beginning of the end of civilization as we know it. And therefore, it's important that not only should Vashti be punished, but we should send out letters to every single province in the king's empire. Everyone should know that every single woman should do what her husband commands her to do and should learn to respect him and should appreciate him, because obviously these alcoholics are all honorable and dignified men whose words are worth listening to. So Haman begins to find favor in Ahhashwerosh's eyes as a result of this. So Vashti was drunk, Ahhashwerosh was drunk, however it worked out, she didn't want to come out. Haman's advice is that she should be killed. And now that she's dead, the king's got to find someone, right? The king's not going to sit there alone. So This nationwide or international search begins for the next queen. That's how Esther ends up inside the kingdom, the empire, and then as Haman becomes more powerful and more important in the government, he decides to make this decree, and he makes the decree while he and Ahhashwerosh also had a few drinks. It goes out, and everybody gets upset, everybody's disappointed, maybe the Jews didn't drink for a little bit, and then the only way that Esther could find to overturn this decree was by throwing one party. Ahhashwerosh says, what is it that you want? I'm happy to give you. No, just come to the next party. The second party, what's the big deal? No, you gotta come to the third party. This is already, a complicated affair. And then finally, right, as his heart is good, as his heart was getting good with his wine, she manages to slip a word in edgewise, and she manages to not overturn the decree, but to soften it a bit. They were allowed to defend ourselves. So the story begins with wine. It gets more complicated because of wine, and the only solution to it is more wine. Spoken like a true alcoholic. Famous words of Winston Churchill. One of his biographers asked him if it was true that he had a problem with alcohol during the war, and that at times he was hard to find, or that he was absent from the public sphere because he had this problem with alcohol. And he said, no, I think that's inaccurate. He said, I think the only problems I ever had in my life were without alcohol. I had alcohol, that was okay. When I wasn't drinking, things got difficult. So Ahhashwerosh apparently took a page out of the playbook of Winston Churchill. What does it mean that Ahhashwerosh respects people's drinking customs?
It says about him, no?
I would think. What is it? So, he does this why? What's he trying to gain? What's he trying to achieve?
It's nice of him. It's nice of a king to do such a thing.
He's trying to federate his kingdom, if you think politically, but there's something more spiritual that you're going to tell us, I'm sure.
Well, at the very simple, superficial level, right? And by the way, they claim this is one of the great achievements of Genghis Khan, the famous Mongol invader, that he was the first one who ever built an empire in which he allowed people to speak their own language. And the reality is that's not true, because if you look through the Megillah, every time Ahhashwerosh had a public communication with the subjects of his empire, always the Megillah troubles itself to tell you that not only in this particular area, so it just says, Hashetia kadat enonis. All we know is that he doesn't force people to drink. And here Chazal tell you, so ones would be force, ones would be someone who forces. So in Hebrew it has more...
It's like from Latin, like onus.
Yes, the onus of proof, right. That's like it. Well,
The onus of
it's an obligation on you to do something. You're forced to do something.
So what, we assume that Latin comes from Hebrew in this case, or
Heavily influenced. There are words that have no Hebrew cognate, but that's one that I always thought was an easy cognate. Right. Onus is when you're obligated or forced or required to do something. Something's onerous. Also, it sits on you. It's an irritating, annoying obligation that you have to deal with. So someone's imposing on you. Someone's, putting pressure on you. So we're told that people can drink however they want. And here comes the Midrash explains to you. What does it mean? It means that you can drink in whatever order, out of whatever size cup, whatever kind of container, if it's a big portion or a small portion. Well, that's not inconsistent with the way Ahhashwerosh ran his entire empire. As a matter of fact, every time he communicates with people, you always see ish va'ish kilshono, everyone according to their language. Right? Every nation according to their written language and according to their spoken language. He was careful to keep these public communications in people's own languages. Here the Gemara says Ahhashwerosh was actually intelligent, at least in a few things, right? Like they say, even a broken clock is accurate twice a day. So he was an alcoholic, he was a misogynist, but one thing he knew. And he knew that people didn't like to be forced to do things they didn't want to do. So how do I consolidate power in my empire? If I force everyone to worship my gods, and I force everyone to speak my language and to adopt my customs, they're going to rebel at some point. They're going to get tired of it. I'm going to say, okay, look, you may not think like me, and I may not think like you, but we have a common enemy. This is the joy and challenge of Israel in the Middle East. The Arabs, they hate each other more than they hate us. Just it's easier to unify themselves around what they perceive to be a common enemy than it is for them to work out their own individual problems. So it's not like they're conspiring in order to build this massive league of loyal Arab nations. They just like to ignore their own problems and project them all on us, make it seem like we're the problem in the Middle East. So Ahhashwerosh appreciates this. He understands this. Give people some space. Don't force them. You'll get more loyalty out of them by allowing them to retain as many of their personal private customs as you can. And it's interesting how the only force in the entire Megillah who's trying to push towards some kind of uniformity is who? Haman. Of all things, Haman is trying to convince Ahhashwerosh to go against his game plan. What's Haman trying to say? And he says this already from the relatively early on, sort of the third chapter of the Megillah, where he points to the Jewish nation and he says, "Yeshno am echad, mufuzar ufrad b'chol not hamelech, v'datei melech einam osim, v'hamelech en shoel hanicham." There's one nation that's scattered, that's disjoint throughout the entire empire of the king, and they don't fulfill your customs. He says, when do you care about your customs? First of all, no offense, you're an alcoholic. I don't know how maqpid or mahmir you are, but let's assume that you care about your own avodah zarah, you care about your own particular customs. Since when is it your business to force people to do these things? Up until now, he was a friendly tyrant, a quasi-libertarian, in the sense that everybody do whatever they want, you worship your gods, I worship mine, it's cool. I don't force you to pray, I don't force you to speak my language, I don't even force you to drink. You come to my parties, you do what makes you happy. Now Haman is trying to push him against this. No, I think we should really be going for an all or nothing kind of thing. Right? And this is very interesting. Now you see this, the difference between Ahhashwerosh and Haman. So Ahhashwerosh takes Haman on board as a member of his cabinet. This is his main advisor, like the number 2 guy in the kingdom. And Haman has a very different approach to politics than Ahhashwerosh does. In particular, you'll find that Haman is a little bit of an extremist. I hate to use the word, but he's a little bit off the deep end. Another good example of this. So tell me, he doesn't like the Jews because the Jews don't worship like the king. But really nobody does. How many of the subjects of the empire were Persian? The rest of them did whatever they wanted. Haman has this all or nothing attitude. The Jews, they can't be different, they have to be just like you, and if not, we have to kill them. And in fact, when all the Jews are bowing down to Haman, Midrash says he even kept avodah zarah on his shoulder just to make it like every time they bow down to him, they're bowing down to some kind of a symbol or some kind of an image. When all of the Jews in the world, except for Ahhashwerosh, are bowing down to him, for him it's not enough. Just like that, it's not enough. It was almost beneath him to have to respond to Mordechai refusing to bow down to him. I'm going to kill you and your entire nation. Life is bad as the vice president of the biggest empire in the world? I mean, like you were missing something? What in your life was where's this hole? Where's the vacuum? Where's the void? That's going to be filled by you going crazy. Risking your own life. In fact, losing your own life. 10 of his sons killed too. In the process of pursuing this one Jewish guy. Just leave him alone, man. Leave it be. So, what? Out of, let's say, 20, 30 million Jews might have been in the empire. It's like one guy sticks out like a sore thumb, and for this you're going to sacrifice everything, your whole career.
30 million?
However many Jews it was at this time. We don't know how many left Israel. We know that it was probably 10 to 20% that came back for the construction of the second Beit HaMikdash, and at this point it was already only a few million. But you're talking about 70 years after the destruction. So assuming, and this is after the 10 tribes already left earlier than that, you had a fairly large number of Jews. Even if it was 10 million, I mean, it's a lot of people, right? At the end of the day, it was a lot of people. Yeah, the Gemara talks about the calculations of how many skeletons were left after Korban HaPesach, easily in the tens of millions. And here you have everyone in the kingdom bowing down to you, except for one guy. Ahhashwerosh couldn't care less. I need these headaches. Got 127 countries on my neck. Now we can deal with this one guy. For what? Go back to drinking. And Haman, alcohol doesn't have that effect on him. He's a little bit of a fiery extremist. He can't deal with this. Very interesting. If we take one more step back from this particular, so tell me it's the alcohol. I mean, maybe on a certain level there is definitely another connection to make. In general, okay, when it comes to spirituality, we have this paradox, this dichotomy between doing things perfectly, getting everything right, and being lazy and not caring about anything. Everyone has mitzvot that are hard for them, mitzvot that are easy for them. There are certain things that just come naturally to you. There are certain things that for some reason take a lot of effort. And so you can go all or nothing. You can try to just do everything all the time perfectly. Or you can, take a very relaxed attitude, not really press yourself too much, and probably not get all that much done. Our approach to Torah and mitzvot And interestingly enough, our approach to Averot as well needs to be a realistic and a practical one, right? Very telling. So Ahhashwerosh doesn't force everyone to drink out of these big cups. He drinks out of big cups because he has money, and he likes fancy wine, and he doesn't mind showing it off. Okay? Nouveau riche, you would say. Lacking a little bit of class. He came into money and he doesn't know what to do with it. When the Midrash tells you that this concept of drinking, like people drink, they don't really retain very much control over themselves. And maybe as a king, you don't need people to be too much in control of themselves. You would like to control people, right? You're the friendly tyrant. You're the lovable, adorable fascist. You can control people's lives for them, and as long as you give them a little bit of drinks, normally they'll give you whatever you're looking for. So give them small quantities. Don't force them. Don't get them out of their comfort zone. Eventually, if any of you have ever seen anybody around alcohol, right, small cups turn into big ones. Familiar with this? Start out, I'll just have a shot, I'll just have a little sip, a little something. It'll be like half beer and half Sprite. It's really only called a shandy. It's not the same thing. And then you get drawn into this, right? Like the appetite comes while you're eating, as they say in French. And so I only had a little bit more, and now I had a lot. Now it's a little bit too much. Well, if already, then I may as well, right? And all of a sudden, you find yourself a little bit beyond where you originally planned to be. But you wouldn't have gotten there. Someone had asked you in the beginning of the night, look, you only have so much alcohol you can drink. You want it all now or you want it later? Normally, when you lose control, it doesn't go from 0 to 100 in a second. It's not normally the way things work. And in fact, it's not just let's say a one day or a one evening kind of phenomenon. Normally, when people start to lose control of themselves spiritually, it starts with small steps. Very few people decide, you know what, that's it. Up until now, I listened to my father, I listened to my mother, I got good grades in school. Tomorrow, avodah zarah. I'm slaughtering a chicken to Satan in my bathroom, and we're going to light incense for all kinds of constellations, and we're just going to let our hair down and party. And usually people go incrementally towards idolatry and towards debauchery. So you start with little things. I'll give you a couple of examples of this from the Gemara and other places, and you'll sort of see where this is going. The Gemara tells us in Masechet Sotah, a fascinating discussion about this, where the expression the Gemara uses is Hata v'shana hutar. Someone who sinned once and then sinned again, shana, you did it a second time, hutar. It's like we permit it for you. It's like it's permissible. The Gemara says, hutar, so kada'atach, what it could be that this is permissible. So the Gemara says, Ela ne'esaro keheter. Like what happens is not that it's permissible, not that it's okay. It's that it became for you like it's something permissible. Right?
For the person.
For the person, for the sinner himself.
Not
right?
for God.
No. No. So why, and again, this is the kind of thing that you need to read with a critical eye. So why would the Gemara say the first version the first time? If my job is to learn from the Gemara's job is to teach me, just come out and say it. If someone does something wrong, it's like it was permissible to him. So the Gemara starts as if it's thinking in your head, right? Chata v'shana hutar. So like you sinned and you did it again, and it's okay, it's permissible to you. Can it be that it's permissible to you? No, not permissible to you. It's as if it's permissible to you. What I was telling you is that this is how Yetzer Hara thinks for you. When Yetzer Hara gets behind the steering wheel, this is the kind of thing you can expect. When you do an Avirah for the first time, right, it's a little bit strange. I don't know, up until now I've been keeping Shabbat, all of a sudden we're in college, I'm in the army, whatever it is. I feel bad. There's a certain degree of inhibition, right? And when someone convinces you, or under the right, or the wrong circumstances, or the wrong crowd, whatever it is, Yetzer Hara usually pushes you just to take a little bit of a step. Because that first step isn't going to make you the professional alcoholic. It's not going to make you the idolatrous psychopath. It's not going to make you the professional reality TV star. The job of that first step, right? The purpose served by that first Avirah is really just to remove this curtain, to remove that barrier of inhibition. That's the real problem. If you wanted to become a professional Rasha, the real problem is this inhibition. You feel bad. And so between you and becoming a Rasha is this bad feeling Let's work on the feeling first. Don't forget about, becoming a professional and training in Avodah Zarah. You need first to get rid of your inhibition. Once the inhibition is gone, then you can do whatever you want. So we're going to chip away at it a little bit. We're going to have to work on it a little bit. Okay? Think in terms of Ahhashwerosh and the empire. Okay? I'm not Persian. I don't even play one on TV. Never been Persian, I probably never will be. But if I had to go from American to Persian, as long as I'm allowed to feel independent and I'm allowed to retain some of my customs and I can, I don't want radical change. No, it gives me stomach aches. So start a little bit, come to a little bit of a party, have a little bit to drink. You'll see we're not so bad, Slowly but surely you start to kind of let go of your inhibition. And at that point already you're a loyal subject of the king. How loyal a subject of the king are you? Where if some idiot in the government were to put out an edict and say you can kill all the Jews, yeah, it's not a bad idea. We should kill the Jews. You're right. Like I have nothing better to do on a Sunday afternoon. I get up and pick up a weapon and go fighting with Jews. Well, when you allow yourself in incremental little bitty pieces to go from point A to point B to point C, you'll ultimately end up doing really crazy things. But that's how it works. Here's another beautiful expression of the part of Chazal. The first one is from Masechet Sotah. And there, when I was talking about your inhibition and how your inhibition gradually gets undone to the point that it doesn't even exist anymore. And so you're thinking like the first expression in the Gemara, which is basically like, it's not even forbidden. What do you mean? As if permissible and forbidden are really functions of your imagination. The second expression the Gemara says, the Gemara says like this. Rubam b'gazel, mi'utam ba'arayot, v'chulam ba'abak l'shon hara. Right? This is in the context of a discussion of why people die. In other words, everybody does things they're not supposed to do. But people don't die all the time every day, because every so often here somebody passes away, it happens. The Gemara explains no. So we all have this past due balance with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? And normally Hashem is patient with you and He gives you time to work on it, to fix things, to straighten yourself out. And there's usually, in history they call this the fundamental cause and the immediate cause, let's say, of a war. So World War I, sure, you had economic tumult, you had a lot of nation states fighting with each other, you had different alliances being drawn. Technically, the immediate cause, like the explosion, was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, but that wasn't the only, like if that could have happened at a different period in time, it wouldn't have resulted in a war. So you had these fundamental causes that are kind of there in the background, and then there's just a spark that caused everything to ignite, so it caused everything to explode. So this, we all have things that we do wrong, that we need to work on, that they leave stains on the neshama, and eventually over time, every so often it gets expunged. You get sick, you have a problem, there's a financial, whatever it is, and these things kind of purge the averot from the neshama if you do them right. So the expression of the Gemara is, Rubam begazel, most people, the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak, is theft, in one form or another, right? Because we're all armed robbers, clearly. Umiyotam ba'arayot, right? The minority of people for forbidden sexual relationships. That's not, that's a broad category in and of itself, but things like adultery.
Theft? What is this in English?
Gazel.
Gel.
Yeah. Right. In modern, the tendency today is to pronounce it Gezel. In
That's
Mishnah,
the first
probably
thing
doesn't.
that people die because of it?
We'll explain. So, Rubam begazel, mi'utam ba'arayot. Really, it's the minority of people who's, the blasting cap, the spark that caused the decree that this person's life should come to an end, has to do with some kind of inappropriate sexual behavior. That's for Hollywood and politicians. V'chulam ba'abak l'shon hara. And everybody gets punished at some point or another over abak l'shon hara. It's not even l'shon hara. It's literally like the dust of l'shon hara, traces of l'shon hara, residue, if you will, of l'shon hara. So, Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato in Mesilat Yesharim has a whole discussion of this particular comment in the part of the Gemara. He explains, look, what's the Gemara telling you? It's telling you that everybody's involved with Yetzer Hara to some degree or another. It always starts out small, it gets bigger, And in some cases, when it's left completely unchecked, it gets totally out of control. And so what's the mechanism? The mechanism is something small, just to break down your inhibition. Something a little bit bigger, just to make sure the inhibition is gone. And then you're exposed. Then it could be the very next thing you do is going to be a catastrophe or a disaster, or the next time that you're presented with a real test, you might fall flat on your face. Right? Why? Because that safety, that barrier that you had between you and Averot, what we refer to in English as inhibition, something inside you that prevents you from doing Averot, something that prevents you from doing something you know ultimately is wrong. And even though you know it's wrong, when you're missing that feeling, it's not that big a deal. It's almost okay. Or under the right circumstances, you start to question these things. So Ramchal explains, Avach Lashon Hara, if you put these things in order of their severity, is really like the lightest, smallest thing. You know? Yohan Maleh, is he a nice guy? He's great. He's fine. You know? And you can say it in such a way that, well, he's great, he's not perfect, or you can say that he's fine, but maybe I could have said something more positive. Why don't you say something even more good? And you can build the whole thing. I didn't say it, I did not say it, I kind of alluded to it, I kind of didn't. You get a stomachache trying to analyze these kinds of things. So can anybody say, so I don't talk about other people, but could it be that something that I said, or some facial expression, or some body language kind of gave you the impression to have something negative to say? That's a Nachal Shon Hara. You know? Adi, she's a nice girl. She's great. And this, what's this? I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to talk about her, I don't want to talk about people.
It's awful.
She did something, don't even get me started. If I start, I'm not going to stop. And, you know, so, you know, it's not Lashon Hara, but it's not that far. And the language of the Gemara is, most of us do this, few of us do this, and everybody does this. So it's almost backward. It's not, you start small, it gets big, it gets big. It's that, look, really most of us end up where we end up. Why? Because of what happened at the end. It's mentioned at the end. So, at the beginning of everything. Why? Because that's where you flirt a little bit with Yetzer Hara. That's where you allow yourself, I didn't say it, I didn't mean it, I didn't imply it, it wasn't direct, it wasn't this, I can come up with excuses, I can defend myself, it's justifiable. So that's how he explains, this is how Yetzer Hara gets his boot in the door. And then from this, you start to rationalize and justify different things. Is it stealing to charge my cell phone in somebody else's building? Does it amount to a penny, 2 pennies, 3 pennies? It's a big deal. If I go to a hotel and I took some tissues, what are they going to stuff tissues in the box? I said they had towels. I took some towels too, and the shampoo and the soap. They want me to take it. Come on, it has their name on it. And from this, you can justify all kinds of things. And of course, I can take pens and paper from work, and I can print things on the printer they have in my cubicle. And I can... So you start small. You say, theft? Me steal something? You mean like take a gun and go to the supermarket and empty a shelf? That's crazy. Why would I do that? Who does these things? What am I, a heroin addict? Sometimes I take things from work and I don't really tell them and ask permission. And okay, so it's like a white lie, you know? Is it? And you don't realize that really it's the same thing. What's the difference? The difference is just, it's not an essential, there's not a qualitative difference, it's a quantitative difference. Some people steal lots, people steal little. Why are you stealing at all? Why don't we live life in such a way that we try not to steal anything from anybody? We make our best efforts to cover our bases. The problem that's, let's say the fundamental cause of the catastrophe that almost was the annihilation of the Jewish people in the time period of Mordechai, Esther, Ahhashwerosh, and Haman, was the Jewish people were assimilated. Right? This is like the story behind the story. And we know this for a fact. One example, we'll see this, maybe we'll do this in the Midrash next week. The Midrash says, Haman, when he points to Ahhashwerosh, he tells him, Yeshno am echad. If it was all before it. So Yeshno, you don't really find that expression very much in Hebrew. This is tricky. If you speak modern Hebrew, certain expressions become very popular. But to really understand Hebrew, you have to understand the Tanakh. Expressions like Yeshno are very rare. So Haman says it, it's a famous pasuk, right? But it's not like every day we use this term, right? Like every pasuk in every parasha in the Torah you come across it. So Yeshno, the Midrash says, that's a weird way of saying something, right? You would say Yesh Am Echad. You could have gotten this. There is a nation. There's one nation that's problematic. Yeshno Am Echad. The Midrash says, Yeshno. Don't read it Yeshno. Read it Yeshnu. Like Yeshnu min hamitzvot. These people are sleeping. So he says they have a culture. Even they can't stand it. What do you want from me? I'm supposed to tolerate this? you as the king, you as the emperor, are supposed to accept this. He said, if they have an identity and they're observant and they keep their mitzvot, maybe they'd be like every other nation. The French drink French wines, they eat French cheese. The Italians drink Italian wine, eat Italian cheese. You have the Chinese eating snakes and scorpions. The Jews have a culture, it's like, even they don't observe it. And they fight with each other, they can't even stand each other. How do you expect me to tolerate a people like this? How do you expect me to view a people like this, a nation like this? How does assimilation happen? If assimilation was the problem, Jews aren't observing the mitzvot. We decided that's it, Beit HaMikdash has been destroyed, let's go have a whole roast pig, and we'll smother it with butter, and we'll do all the avarot that we can in one day. Probably not, right? Assimilation, if you think about it, it's a somewhat gradual process, right? It takes time. So maybe we started, well, we know that we weren't observing all the mitzvot already when Beit HaMikdash was still in existence. So a little bit of depression, a little bit of anxiety, we know that we're going out into Galut. And slowly but surely, well, I'm not so careful about this mitzvah, and this one I'm not so really good at keeping, and that one I don't remember the details, but I'm not going to open a book because it's heavy, So you start to lose your control over the mitzvahs, you lose your knowledge, your understanding. This becomes a big part of your life. And then eventually it becomes almost accidental. You sometimes do some of the mitzvot, but really you're doing avarot, and you know that you shouldn't. And the entire nation comes to a point where nothing we do is going to change this pattern. And every day that goes by, the Jews become less observant, they become less into their own culture. Until Ahhashwerosh sends us someone who's really, really sensitive to Jewish culture. Like, we don't care, not a big deal. We do mitzvot, we don't do them, it is what it is. Haman, who's super, super sensitive to mitzvot, and super sensitive to Jewish culture, it bothers him, it irritates him. Like, his whole life is an obsession with Jewish culture. He died because he had nothing better to do than fight with the Jews. That's Mesirut Nefesh. This is what we call self-sacrifice.
Just press the key for a while.
I have a theory that when they designed all these buildings,
It's like the worst.
everybody was really old and decrepit, and they didn't have hearing
Every time I
aids.
get scared.
We were very concentrated. We were all
Right. Everybody was working very deeply.
Even when I'm expecting things, I get scared. I give my card and just be there.
So the story behind the story was what we're not told in the Megillah is that the entire reason for the Megillah, the reason that we even have Purim, is not because we won a war, it's because there was a war. In fact, this was supposed to be a total annihilation. Barely at the last minute, we managed to get it overturned. Right? Barely, at the very, very last minute, we managed to pull up the handbrake and managed to stop the catastrophe. But this catastrophe, how did it start? It started before the Megillah even started. The story was basically cooking already before Esther even comes onto the scene. And this particular detail of Ahhashwerosh and the parties that we're drinking basically shows us, it kind of puts on prominent display how this was the mode at the time. This is what was going on. You can drink, you don't have to drink, but she's drinking. I'm really, he's drinking out of a big cup, I'm drinking out of a small cup. What am I doing? Sitting drinking out of my shot glass. She's drinking out of a beer stein. I'm jealous. I should drink a little bit of cup. I'll go home, I'll buy a bigger one next time there's a party. You see, I'm going to show everybody I'm just like everybody else. And the race, the assimilation gets worse and worse, and it happens at a faster and faster pace. Until 7 years after Beit HaMikdash, we have kids who have no clue what it means to be Jewish. Kids who have no clue why they're any different from anybody else. And naturally, they're not really even interested in fighting for it. At least not until someone says, I'm going to kill you because you're Jewish. Kill me because I don't even know I'm Jewish. It's that big a deal. What am I supposed to do? If I'm Jewish, I'm doing things differently. I'm supposed to be living a different lifestyle. And all of a sudden, the nation, kibul v'kiblu, that's the expression, right? They all of a sudden, they look back into the Torah and the mitzvot, and they find things they weren't really observing beforehand, and they have a little bit more of a desire to observe. To make the point really clear and to hit home, you should know that there's a principle in Kabbalistic literature that the way things function with Yetzer Hara is very often indicative of how it functions with Yetzer HaTov too, and vice versa. In other words, the rules of the game are not drastically different between Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer Hara. And so, for example, if I wanted to assimilate someone into observance of the Torah and Mitzvot, right? chances are I stand to learn a thing or two from Ahhashwerosh, who very successfully assimilated 127 nations into his greater empire. Chances are, someone who has a little bit of an inhibition towards Torah and Mitzvot, someone who doesn't really believe this makes sense, or they're interested in doing this, Torah is best taken in small bites, right? There's something to be said for, undoing the inhibition, this anti, they say in Hebrew, like getting a little bit of the sting out of someone's prejudices towards the Torah and Mitzvot, showing them small, tasty little tidbits. You can do this, you can enjoy that, etc., and then you move on. Classic story like this, and it's really very telling on this particular, in this context. The story told by Uri Zohar when he himself started to do teshuvah. Very interesting. The Rav that influenced him the most was a German Rav, the Rav Shapira. Apparently, I don't know how old Rav Shapira was when he met him, but Uri was in his late 30s, early 40s, I think, when he started. And he says of himself that he was very curious. Someone asked through some weird story, through a friend of his who was going by, so we happened to stop by the rabbi's house. They talked, he asked a few questions, he cracked a few jokes. The rabbi was patient, and he gave him some time. And so he came back to see him again, started in Yerushalayim. And he said to him that he was wondering about this whole thing about the Shabbat, why people keep Shabbat, why does it have to be so strict, why can't I do things that I like? And I told him Shabbat is about nothing but what you like. Only what you enjoy. Onid, Ta'anug. Shabbat is really about pleasure. She says to him, so I want to learn more. He said, don't learn anything. You like to eat? He said, yeah, just eat. You like to drink? Yes. So go ahead and drink. You like to sleep? Sleep. That's your Shabbat. He said, for the first couple of months, I don't want to talk to you. Don't open a siddur, don't do anything that's going to put you out of your comfort zone. Just eat, drink, and sleep. And this way you're going to observe Shabbat. And then when you're ready, then when you have a little bit of an understanding, you're a little bit more acclimated and a little bit more receptive to it, we'll get into some of the deeper concepts, some of the deeper aspects of it. If you give him too much in the beginning, he's going to reject it, going to explode. How do I know? I don't. But Yohan Maleh, remember something we discussed way back when in Masechet Chagigah, where the Gemara has a discussion about the secrets of the Torah. And there, one of the expressions used, remember this pasuk from Mishlei, Devash matzata echol dayeka pentis be'enu v'hakeroto. Literally, the Torah is compared to, in many ways, to wine, and in some cases to honey, where it says, Devash matzata echol dayeka. If you found honey, don't eat too much, right? Eat just enough. Pentis be'enu v'hakeroto. Lest you should become like over-satiated with the honey, and you'll vomit it all back up. People don't appreciate this. This is true of friends, it's true of relatives, it's true of children. You can't press too hard, you can't force feed them too much. It just doesn't work. Torah becomes unpalatable to people who feel like they're being forced. How do I know? Because Ahhashwerosh is really good at getting people to become idolaters, so he did it gently. I don't force anyone to do anything. Think of the hippie movement, right? We're used to Stalin and Lenin, communists. They force people to march with them, they force people to fight with them, but those movements fall apart. How long did it last in Russia? 1917, 1918, until the late 80s. They got 7 years out of it, not much more. Ahhashwerosh is basically trying to entice you and say, well, like the hippie movement. I don't judge people, you don't have to judge people, you've got your customs, that's cool, man. Do your thing, I do my thing, no reason for anybody to force anything. We don't need anybody judgmental here, we don't need anybody on judge cases. And that's appealing, that's attractive. Yeah, I don't like it when people judge me, and I think it'd be better if nobody judged anybody, and of course I can do that. And if I don't judge you and you don't judge me, sure, we can have a whole culture, a whole society based on people not judging anybody. And those types of movements have an appeal, they have an interest. It piques your curiosity, to be exposed to something like this. Tell somebody that Judaism is all about doing this and doing that, and being accurate and being precise, and weighing how much you eat and how much you drink, and the time you wake up, and when you have to say Shema, when you have to go to sleep. So for them, it's very regimented, it's very strict, and it tends to
Yeah, but eventually
push people.
it has a big component of that, so you start in a different way, but eventually you have to get there.
Well, because now it started, I'm going to respond, and this time from Rav Nachman Breslev. Makes a very, very interesting comment on this topic. You have to respect Rav Nachman because today tens of thousands of people are still inspired by what he wrote. And incidentally, there were discussions not long after he passed away about he had a very special way of reaching Rosh Hashanah in a way that people in previous generations couldn't. So one of Rav Nachman's halachic elucidations, right? And there's merit to this. It requires a lot of learning, but there's merit to this. And I don't subscribe to everything. I'm just putting it out there for disclosure's sake. I'm not a Breslover Chassid. Sometimes I come across certain ideas and they make sense. Others maybe not quite so much. So he said, in response to precisely this kind of question, that when you really get down to it, there are very, very few things, in his words, practically nothing, in Torah and Halacha that's like exactly to the gram, or exactly to the second, you know? So what did he mean? Well, Shabbat starts, right? The time Shabbat starts, you have to be careful, because Shabbat started, you will violate Shabbat, transgress, chas v'shalom. When does Shabbat start?
18 minutes before
I don't look
Shkia.
like a rabbi. I'm asking you, what do I know, huh?
Well, the time I write is 18 minutes before Shkia.
Okay, so this is a time it's customary to light the candles and to stop doing melacha, okay? And if something came up, you got stuck.
You get your 18 minutes easy.
Okay, so you don't want to push it to the last minute, right? Because the last minute is going to be what?
Shkia.
Shkia. The Shulchan Aruch didn't hold this way in the beginning. It's not so evident from the Gemara. There's a whole discussion at what point Shabbat starts. According to Rabbeinu Tam, this probably was the way Shulchan Aruch held originally. The custom has become not to hold like him on this particular topic, like something so insignificant as when Shabbat starts. So the older opinion used to be, or the previous opinion used to be, that maybe Shabbat technically only starts with Rabbeinu Tam, meaning when it's absolutely dark outside, from Tzedek Kochavim until Tzedek Kochavim.
So 24 hours sharp.
It would be approximately, right? Maybe he would tell you, take 18 minutes before that or 10 minutes before that, so you're not cutting it too close. In other words, not to wait exactly to the last minute. Satmar still holds this way.
As of now, the guys in
There's a
Brooklyn
branch
do
of
it.
Satmar that still starts Shabbat way later than everyone else, yeah.
Satmars?
Yeah, of all people, you would think,
Later,
right?
like later.
Wow.
Ma'aseh shahaya kachaya. There was once an incident in which the Satmar Rebbe came to the Kotel in
No, he
Israel,
told me the story. That I know.
later than everyone else expected him to be there, with a driver and everything, and it became a whole scandal. He said, look, what do you want from me? I'm holding on to Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, who both agreed